Hi, folks. I see a lot of faces I recognize from last time. It's good to see you back. And I'm sure we enticed you with our topic this time around. Hopefully, it will live up to its title. I wanted to start by reading something from the 1895 catalog. That's the second year the school was open. It says, "We call attention with pleasure to our comfortable and beautiful school home. No pains have been spared to make it a fit dwelling for culture and refinement. It is our desire to provide a happy, cheery home where girlhood may expand into womanhood under the most wholesome and healthful influences. Our tenderest and kindliest home care will be given at all times. Our girls are our daughters, who claim our affections and in whose whole future we are interested." So tonight we're going to see how well the students lived up to that. They sometimes did, they sometimes didn't. So we'll have a look at what they got up to. First, I wanted to talk about some of our sources. Miss Frances Anderson, who was called Frank by her friends, was a student here in 1896 through 98. These are from her collection that we have. I don't know if they are of her, they weren't labeled, but you get a sense of her classmates at any rate if they weren't actually her. We have her letter, a collection of letters that she wrote home to her parents in Lowell, Massachusetts. She was a very studious girl. She was not really a partier. She helped out in the office. She was appointed a chaperone for younger girls. And she's who I call the good girl when we're reading through the reminiscences. We also have a number of school catalogs, which I've already read one quote from, and we'll hear a couple more, that give sort of what the school expected of its students. We have letters from a Miss Helen Cargill, who was a student here in 1914 through 1917. If anybody knows of Cargill Incorporated, it's a huge multinational corporation. Apparently, it's America's largest private company by revenue currently. So Miss Cargill was pretty well off. It was her uncle and her father who founded, or her grandfather who founded the company. She was from Minneapolis. She was a bit of a prima donna, is what I'm guessing from some of her letters, and I call her the spoiled one. We also have letters from a Miss Margaret Sheasley, who goes by Madge. She wrote a number of letters home to her beau, Mr. Warren Ross, in 1900. I call her the lovesick one. And we have a Miss Charlotte Chafee, whom you may remember from last time. We have her diary from 1908. And she was the slightly wicked one, also a little bit lazy. So let's start out talking about money. According to the 1895 catalog, we wish to teach our girls the value of money. Probably no one cause has been so potent a means of wrecking domestic happiness as ignorance of finance on the part of women. And this ignorance is frequently willful on the part of girls and their parents. It is considered not in taste for a girl to know the exact limit of her resources. We therefore request each parent to limit the daughter to a certain modest amount of spending money, put it on her credit at the Seminary bank, and require a strict account of it. Whoops, that was from that book right there. And that is the bank here on campus. So if you might guess that the girls didn't really live up to these expectations about managing their money. And we learned from Helen Cargill, who was the spoiled one, in 1915, just after she returned to school from her Christmas vacation. "I think I did very well on the money question. I arrived in Forest Glen with $21.50, and I haven't spent a cent of it yet." But then she writes home, very shortly afterwards, "Day after tomorrow, they're going to collect $5 for a trip downtown. I don't know what I am ever going to do because I only have 42 cents to my name, and they are in my penny bank. Then, too, Sir Herbert Beerbone Free is coming a week from next Saturday in Henry VIII, and I want to see that because I don't know when I'll ever have a chance again, but 42 cents isn't very elastic. I wish I had $1 million right this minute. I don't think I'd have it very much left in a week or so." I hope you'll bear with me. I don't have a lot of pictures to demonstrate some of these things, so you're just going to have to listen to me a lot. We know from Frances Anderson, who was the good girl in 1896, about her money situation. She says, "Dear Mama, I'm writing from my new desk, and I think it's fine. There's so much room in it. Please tell Papa that I have just received his letter and that I didn't mean to ask for money in my first letter. So she needed money right away. She writes just a few weeks later that she bought a cape, and that she says to her mother, "With my cape and the fees for the dentist, I have about $4 left. Do not know of anything that I shall need any money for some time, but when Papa feels that he has got any spare cash, he knows where it will be welcome." And this is just 3 days later. She writes directly to her father. She butters him up with like 2 pages of how much she loves her classes and how good her civil government class is and how wonderful the campus is. And then she says, "Tempus fugit, also cash fugits. Can you send me a little more soon and I'll see how long I can keep it? But my cape, the dentist, fruit, a book, the play, and the school pin have eaten a hole in my money." Love that. She was a Latin scholar as well, so. And then we have a couple years later, she was at the school for a couple of years, she says to her mother, "Please to ask Papa if he doesn't think it would be a good scheme for him to send so much money to me a month. Tell him I do," that's underlined. "Only please send my March supply soon so that I can be sure to have it before the 4th. And her father writes back to her, "My dear Frank, enclosed I send you a check for $20, as you will want some for your expenses on your Thanksgiving trip. While I want you to have enough, I wish you to be economical and know the value of money." Basically, she's getting a little scolding from her dad, so. But the very next letter we have from Frances is to her mother, and it says, "Please tell Papa that his daughter's getting out of cash." So she didn't learn. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the decorations in the school. The catalog was very informative about how they decorated the school, and they wanted to know that the girls would be living in a certain environment. So they say that each room is prettily and daintily furnished, carpeted and decorated. And here are some rooms from the 19-teens. It says each student was welcome to make her room more home-like with dresser scarves, pictures, photographs, pillows, and other articles of similar nature. However, each student, did it go forward? There we go, that's from the 30s. However, each student should be ever mindful of the fact that simplicity in room furnishings is an indication of good taste. You can guess what's coming. This is, oops, Steve, what'd you do? Thank you. This is a girl's room from her own photo album, and you can see it's pretty jam-packed and cluttered. And if you look at the lamp, this is a panoramic, so you'll see the lamp in the next one. Oops. And then there's the lamp again in that one. So you see, she was a bit of I don't want to call her a slob, but she definitely didn't throw anything away. So we know that most of the girls, the majority of the girls who went to school here, have very fond memories of their time here. We have lots and lots of information in our archives about how wonderful they thought their time here was. The strength of the Alumni Association over the years attests to how much they love their school. And we know Frances Anderson, the good girl, she was very proud of her family's choice to send her to National Park Seminary. And she wrote to her mama shortly after she arrived in 1896, "Write me soon, for I wanted to come home pretty bad yesterday and today. All the same, I don't think we could have picked a better school." And then she writes to her papa a few days later, "I'm very happy here and think that the school and the girls are fine. I think they have the best class of girls here that I have seen anywhere." However, Madge Sheasley, she writes home to her boyfriend, Warren Ross, and I don't have a, well, those are the fond memories. There we go. That's the girls enjoying themselves, and the ones who probably were writing home that they liked it here. But we have from Margaret Sheasley, she writes to her, she's the lovesick one, by the way, which you'll know when you hear this. "You know, when I read yours and Mama's letters, it always makes me feel so sad and so lonely. For Warren, I am so homesick, and I weep from morning till night. Oh, Warren, if I could only throw my arms around your neck and whisper in your ear that I love you, it would make me so happy. And darling, I want to come home. I cannot live down here without you, Warren, and I am so afraid I will grow so homesick that I will die. I can scarcely see for tears, darling, and I had to leave the dining room last evening. I cried so hard. I should have called her the drama queen instead of the lovesick, because she really is a bit melodramatic. And I put this photo in, which is from her year. Again, they aren't pictures of her, but they're representative. Because I didn't get a chance to scan her letter, one of her letters home to Warren, which was a blotchy mess, because apparently she had been crying all over it. And she writes home on this tear-stained stationery, "Darling, I can't write this over, for the tears would blot the next letter just the same. Oh, I am so homesick, dear darling. Can't I come home? Write and tell me that you love me often, dearie, for I love you so much. I can't write any more, dear. I am so sick." And of course she writes 3 more pages. "Oh, Warren, I love you so. Will you be true to me, darling? Don't let anyone see my letters. Oh, the tears. They flow so fast." Yeah. And that was in October of 1900. And then a couple days later she writes, "You ask me, dear, if I expect to come back here next winter. Well, I should say not. You could not hire me to ever enter the door of NPS again. I simply hate it here," and that's underlined, but that is confidential. So she didn't return. As far as I can tell, she did not return, and we know that that was in 1900, assuming she came back to finish out the year in 1901. We know that she was married by 1903 with a daughter, and her name by that time was Mrs. Warren Ross. So she did hook Warren, even though she was a bit dramatic. Food and drinks. Drinks you might have expected in this lecture, but we'll talk about food first. Many of you are familiar with our beautiful dining room, which is now the community room. When the girls went to dinner, they were expected to eat there, seated, 3 meals a day, but dinner they were expected to dress for. Otherwise, they would wear their school uniforms. And it was a formal affair. And I wanted to, here's a picture of them in their finery. This is an actual formal occasion, not a normal dinner. But I wanted to read to you from some guidance about dining. Conduct in the dining room. Everyone stands behind her chair until the grace is sung. No student sits down until the hostess has first been seated. No one begins eating until the hostess gives the signal. The hostess indicates by use which piece of silverware is correct. It goes on and on. Soup and salads served by the hostess are passed halfway around the table. Students desiring service should not address the waiter, but should speak to the hostess, who will give the order to the waiter. No one should ever rest her elbows on the table. It goes on and on. It goes on and on about how to behave, what proper decorum is in the dining room. So we do know that food and etiquette were very much regulated here. And essentially, food from outside the school was forbidden on campus. The mail was all inspected, and anything that was deemed unhealthy, like cakes or any home-baked goods that were sent to the girls, were removed. But you got to keep in mind these were high school girls, early college, so, do you really think they followed this rule? Charlotte Chafee, who I call the wicked one with the lazy tendencies, she says, "Went in town with Helen and had our hair marceled and put up on top of our heads, and we got some things to eat for the feast tonight. In the evening, there was a recital by the students at the Odeon, but we didn't go. After light bell, Ruth and Virginia came up, and we had a feast. Had chicken and ham sandwiches, olives, grapes, Charlotte Russe candy. Everything was great. We finished at 12 o'clock, and the girls went back home." So not only is she cheating by eating in her room, she's getting her friends in on it too. So everybody came up after light bell, which is when you are supposed to be in bed, and they had a little party. One alum reported in the 1940s, she recollected that the girls would go into DC and they would order candy from the department stores and have it shipped in corset boxes because they knew the school wouldn't open the corset boxes out of propriety. Very sneaky. They also got their parents involved, and they were culprits too. We know that one mother succumbed to her daughter's wish for sweets when she emailed some in a box with bricks that she labeled books, so they didn't think to look in it. Helen Cargill writes in 1916, to her mother, "I got my box yesterday, and thank you ever so much for everything in it. They wouldn't let me have my cake, and I was furious about it, but it didn't do any good. They opened my box and took it all out except the nuts. Mary and I have been stuffing them ever since. My desk is heaped with shells this morning because we ate so many last night." At least she got to keep her nuts. They didn't take everything. And this, while it's hard to read, I spent copious amounts of time reading letters. This one is actually easy to read compared to some of the handwriting. But this is from our friend Frances Anderson, who's the good girl. And she's asking her mom to send her a box for Thanksgiving. Apparently the school made exceptions for Thanksgiving, and you could have a box of fresh food sent to you, and they would let you keep it. And she says, "On Thanksgiving, the girls have boxes. Don't you want to send me one? There are two very nice Western," yeah, don't you love that, how she phrases it as a question. "There are two very nice Western girls here who live so far away, and they can't have a box, and I would like to share mine with them. Keep in mind, everything arrives on the train, and it's fresh. It's not refrigerated, so if you live far away, you don't get a box." And she is the nice, conscientious girl, so she's living up to her, how I perceive her. "It will be such fun to have a box. Here are some ideas for you," and this is in the letter. "Bread. Couldn't you get in a little jar of butter? Ham, graham crackers, chow chow, sardines, tea, can of salmon, lemons, sugar, jelly, wafers, egg biscuits, gingerbread, mixed nuts, and crackers. Would a little jar of salad dressing be possible? Cheese and a can opener. I guess you think I've taken leave of my senses, but I would be so glad if you can send me even a few of the things. The eating here is very good. It's just the fun of a box from home." Indeed, we find out a couple weeks later that she did get her box and was very pleased. Next, we're going to talk about drinking. And since I don't have any pictures of it, I'll show you the girls being good rather than being bad. We don't know a whole lot about the alcohol drinking habits of our girls here, but we do know they were exposed to it. I make the assumption that it came from the boys, which I think it did, so we'll blame it on the boys for this one. But we have a remembrance from one of the girls who said the following: "One of our teachers insisted, as the girls came in from their dates, that they come in and kiss her so that she could tell they hadn't been drinking. I never drank, so I got sent up for all the girls that were coming in. She couldn't see very well either, so she didn't know, and she'd say, 'Hi, so-and-so, how are you?' and kiss me, and I'd kiss her back, and then I'd go be another girl in line." I hope she got some favors from the girls she covered for. Smoking. This is what they called cigarettes when they were disapproved of, and they very much were disapproved of here at National Park. They were referred to as the filthy wood, and smoking was absolutely just forbidden. The school's literature states, quote, "Smoking is absolutely prohibited, and no girl is allowed even to have a cigarette in her possession on penalty of dismissal from the school." So. I just love that picture. Yeah. So we have one student's story about smoking. She lived in the villa, which was a dorm, and she used to go up on the roof to smoke, which means she had to go out of a window, climb up, and get on the roof. But she said she was scared to death because it was a metal roof and it creaked, and so she had to tiptoe, have her cigarette, get back down without being caught. And she did it every time. We also have a letter that was written to Frances from one of her former sorority sisters in Coyote Pie. She says, "The Glen is so pretty, but Frank dear, we Coyote Pies are in trouble. Jane Brown is disgraced to be censured publicly on Tuesday for smoking cigarettes. We feel too bad to talk about it." So I don't know what happened with Miss Brown, but she was called out and very much reprimanded for her behaving. So we've talked about food, drink, money, things of that nature. Let's get into the meat of it. Yes, theft apparently was quite a problem here on the campus. Again, I don't really have any pictures showing the girls engaged in criminal activities, so you'll have to bear with me. So we do know that there were a lot of thefts that happened here. As early as 1898, there were reports of stealing when Frances writes home to her mother that the Cassidys had hired a woman detective. She explains that they had had a man here investigating some thefts, but he wasn't effective because they couldn't leave him alone anywhere with the girls, and he couldn't stay overnight, he couldn't go into dorm rooms. So Mrs. Cassidy went up to New York City and hired a woman detective who hopefully could, spend the night in the halls and nab the thief when she was about. So Charlotte Chafee, 10 years later in 1908, says, "In quiet hour, I found my purse had been rolled, and as near as I can make out, about $10 or $15 were taken, right out of the top of my bureau drawer." And again, in 1917, Helen Cargill writes that, "I've just come from sorority meeting, and we have been having great arguments. Someone has been doing a great deal of stealing lately in senior house, and they can't seem to find out who it is, although the maid in our corridor seems to be the suspected one now. I hope they trace it down very soon, because so much excitement keeps us on edge all of the time." So we don't know what happened with any of these. These are just references I find. So it's very intriguing, whether it was the staff or, if girls have it in them to take a little, pilfer a little here and there. At any rate, we have another story of theft that unfortunately is quite tragic. But it does talk a little bit about the character of the girls who went to school here. And the story took place in 1914 at the home of two NPS students. They were sisters, and at their home in California. Unfortunately, burglars broke in and shot their father fatally. They also shot their brother, and as chronicled here in the New York Times, the two intruders, quote, "were severely hurt by the two Alexander girls, Penelope and Anna, who battered the robbers with heavy silver-backed hairbrushes. One of the thieves said of the attack, 'Those two girls fought like wildcats.'" So while tragic, it just fits right in with the type of young lady at the school. And next to that is a letter from President Cassidy extending his condolences. The third story I have of crime here on campus is probably one of the most intriguing anecdotes about National Park Seminary. And that comes from a letter that Helen Cargill wrote in 1916. Steve? There we go. Okay, and this is the kitchen. This is the scene of the crime. She writes, "Last night we had an awful time. Just as at dinner time, 3 pistol shots were fired. And when people got there, they found that the cook had shot one of the colored boys. He shot at him, but he didn't hit him. The maids were all frightened badly, but they had to get over it and serve our tables. The sheriff and marshal and constables were all here last night and tried the man. I don't know what they did to him, but I know he isn't here." And that's all I know. I looked for newspaper articles. I couldn't find any reference to this. I suspect the school hushed it up, because it would look really bad for the students and their parents if they found out that there had been some gunfire and potentially, injuries and fatalities at the school. So that's all we know. It's intriguing. I wish I could find out more details. All righty. So we know how girls were punished from a letter that Frances Anderson writes. She says, 5 marks, and I'll just flip through, hopefully, some pictures of the girls misbehaving. 5 marks that you can get no excuse for make 1 demerit. When you have 1 demerit, you receive formal notice from the office. The next time Mr. Cassidy sees you. The 3rd, you see the faculty. The 4th, you are reproved in chapel. And when the 5th comes, you are requested to go home. Mabel Cox has so far managed to get 2 demerits and 3 marks. She is one of the younger girls. She started to run away the other day. Mr. Cassidy got her just as she was getting onto the train. And this is our good girl. She says, "I haven't had a mark yet." We have Helen Cargill says that I got into an awful mess last night and got caught. Fräulein Frommel, one of the music teachers, had a caller in the Regency room last night. While she was playing to him in her studio, another girl and I crept downstairs and hid his hat. There were about a dozen of us. We were hanging over the balcony, and she opened the door. We all ran, and that brought Dobby up because she has a fit if anyone runs. Then Fräulein Frommel came tearing upstairs, wanting to know where the gentleman's hat was hidden. Grace showed her where it was and then came back. We were lectured to and scolded for about half an hour. I think I'll have to be good until Easter, because this is the third thing I've been in trouble for around here lately. Charlotte Chafee writes in her diary in 1908, and this is such a typical entry for her. In the evening, Dr. Hanchette gave a musical recital in the Odeon, but Helen and I stayed in the room and turned off the lights rather than go to that thing. 2 days later, Dr. Hanchette gave a musical, but Helen and I went down to Mary Story's room and had a good time, and we weren't caught either. A couple weeks later, there was a pupils' recital at the Odeon, but we didn't go. We were all in Virginia's room. Dr. Leland came in and caught us, but I guess she won't say anything. So, again, she's getting her other girls are participating as well, so. And then we had an alum remember, I'll just flip through some more, remember a huge water fight in Senior House. And this is recorded in the 1940s. She says, 1 floor up from the bottom floor was totally inundated. The girls were filling bathtubs full of water, taking waste paper baskets and throwing them through the transoms. Anybody who came by got dumped. That was a wonderful memory. I don't know. I find them in their albums, but this is my favorite one. It says, "Our little rascal as the vamp." And this is a picture of the solarium, which is on the back of the gym. And this, you can see, I think it says something about where the girls take sun baths. And this was considered healthful at the time to get sun. You see the skylight up there. So the girls were, this is showing off the amenities of the campus, but the girls really didn't need to go to the solarium because there was nude sunbathing on the roof of Villa. All right, we'll move on to clothes. Very important aspect of student life here was regulating dress and getting around those regulations. A lot of the girls, as you know, were from very wealthy families and they liked to show off their gowns. Part of that is why they instituted a dress code and made the girls wear uniforms in the 19-teens, and that's at the top slide is showing them in their uniforms. This is from a booklet called Concerning Dress, published in, I think it's 24, so you'll get some of the fashion sense from that time period. This publication gives full details on what was expected for daily wear, trips to town, dinner, parties, as well as what kind of hats, shoes, hose, jewelry, wraps, and underclothing to bring with you. One example is the part about shoes, and here's what it says. Students were instructed to bring 7 pairs of shoes for the following occasions. 2 pairs for wear with the school uniform, 1 pair of which must be white to match the white dress, the other pair must be black or dark brown, not tan. 1 pair of black or brown shoes for town wear, 2 pairs of appropriate shoes for wear with Sunday and dinner dress, 1 pair in black, the other in white. Another pair in color may be added to match a gown. In italics, this pair may not be worn off the campus. 1 pair of slippers for wear with the party dress. These may be black, gold, or silver, or any color to match the dress. No more than 7 pairs of shoes will be permitted. Now, I don't know about you, but that sounded like 20 pairs of shoes in there, but at any rate, they were very strict about it, and we know this because Helen Cargill writes home to her mother. She says, "No, I don't think it was a good plan to send all of those shoes home. Most of them were colored pumps to wear with evening dresses. Of course, we can't wear either kind here, but it was nice to have them if you happen to be invited any place for a weekend." A lot of girls hid bronze pumps and extra shoes in laundry bags until inspection was over. I think they would be more sensible if they restricted the buying of more shoes, because loads of girls went in town the following Monday and bought more shoes. I bought a pair myself. So they're getting around it, obviously. And I told this story last time, but it bears repeating. Here's another picture from that era of their formal dress. This is the story of a girl who had a date that was arranged for her by Mrs. Guernsey, the social secretary for the school. She would call up boys when a girl didn't have a date and invite them out. A boy on the approved list, I should clarify. Invite him out and to spend the evening with a girl who didn't have a date. And this alum says that the student wasn't really that interested in going on a date. So she says, not caring about how she looked, she let the girls dress her in the height of fashion. Each of her friends contributed to her wardrobe. When they finished, she wore a slinky evening gown, a very glamorous hairdo, and a makeup job that was fascinating. Maybe something along these lines. Thinking perhaps the hostess wouldn't let her see the man in such garb, which I am sure she would not, the girls clustered around her and completely surrounded her until she reached the date parlor. She intrigued the young man, and finally, when it was time for him to leave, the girls floated back by the parlor and swept their heroine up the steps. We also know that from the school catalog, very specifically, no cosmetics are permitted, excepting a simple face powder. And now we move on to the school's ultimate bad girl. This is Irene Castle. She was born Irene Foote. She was an international dance and silent movie star, a noted fashion icon, and there she is with her dance partner and husband, Vernon Castle, on the right. She was also a student here at NPS in 1908. According to her biography, at 15, she took a very early interest in boys, and she was attached to one too strongly for her parents' tastes. They got in all kinds of arguments, and she threatened to move to New York to be with her aunt. And finally, in exasperation, her parents sent her down here. While she was here at National Park Seminary, she loved being the center of attention, and that was one of the things that got her into her first bout of trouble. She cut off all her hair. Irene Castle is also credited with inventing the bob haircut in 1908, which is much earlier than we think of. We think of it as the teens and the 20s, but really, this is the yearbook from 1909. That's what the hairstyle was. And if you look, every girl had that hairstyle. So she was radical in this. And the problem was, not that she did it, but that her fellow students decided they wanted to do it too. And so the school started getting angry letters from the parents. And I mean, this was a big deal for this level of society to have your daughter butcher her hair like that. So Irene knew she was in trouble, and she split. She caught a train, she went up to New York to Aunt Molly. Wisely, Aunt Molly called Dr. Cassidy and said, come pick her up, which he did, brought her back to the school, and she was let off with very stern warnings and a lecture on her behavior and her attitude. However, she didn't change because she immediately started planning her next escape, this time to elope with her boyfriend. And when she was found out, she was expelled. So, but just so you know, this is what all of the haircuts look like in the next few years. No one had long hair. So, on to the topic that I'm sure everybody wants to hear about. We know that initially the girls had very little contact with boys, and when they did, it was strictly supervised. Mrs. Guernsey invited select men from different universities to come in and have dates with the girls, but rarely were the girls allowed to go off campus for dates. If they were allowed, they were usually escorted, and they had to have a letter from their parents giving permission. However, we know about Peg Bartley, who's down in the lower right corner. We have a reminiscence from an alumna from the class of 1941, and she remembers that Peg Bartley used to sneak out. Apparently, right below here, below the ballroom, at the ground level, she would climb out the window to go see her beau, who was a football player in Georgetown. So she doesn't give too much details, but she said there were a lot of shenanigans to get in and out of the window without being seen by the night watchman. So apparently there were some diversions to get the night watchman to ignore Miss Bartley climbing out the window. And that gentleman at Georgetown was a lucky guy because Peg was voted most beautiful that year. We have another alumna reminiscence. who says that her boyfriend, who's now her husband, drove down from college to pay her a visit. This is not a picture of them, it's just a nice picture. She says, I couldn't drive at the time, but her friend, Bonnie Bell, who was in the Alpha House, she knew how to drive. Unfortunately, they didn't know how to get downtown. So they stole his car, got on the streetcar tracks, and followed them into town. That's the way, that's how you do it. That concludes my research on our girls, but I do have some footage that I'd like to share that's from the, turn this to black, that's from the reunion we hosted in 2010 of the National Park Seminary alumni. So we asked them to join a panel that fielded questions from the audience, and so we can hear some of their stories in their own words. And it takes it a second to load up.
Going away to school wasn't the way going away to school is today. We were not, working was kind of a no-no. We were taught, number one, remember you're always a lady, and number two, be a gracious lady. And my family really thought that this was exposing me culturally, and if I was going to leave the nest, I was going to go to a very well-protected nest. And that was, if I was going to fly, this was as far as I was going to fly.
Elaine, what was your story?
Mine is Kyokai. I think you passed the little cottage coming in. It's painted green now, and it is absolutely charming. And we had a lot of fun there. Our sorority mother was also the art teacher here, Miss Kelly, and she was jovial and fun, and we used to look forward to those Sunday nights. And one special thing she did was read tea leaves. So we had a lot of questions in those days, boyfriends and whatever. And we would go up on the second floor, and she would read the tea leaves. And that was, I remember that just so well. But we all went to our sorority houses on Sunday nights, and they were all very charming, as you can see if you drive around. They are unique, and they were social. They had nothing to do with national sororities, but we loved them.
One of our members of the audience wants to know how you met boys in this all-girls school.
Well, I can tell you.
It wasn't hard.
I can remember standing up in one of these balconies with the long white gloves up to here and a long dress with the tongues hanging out, watching all the boys coming in from Annapolis and Georgetown, and we all had to pay 10 cents for a date.
We don't remember the 10 cents.
Well, I remember it. We came down and we were introduced to the boys, and then we danced here.
Who collected the 10 cents?
Yeah, probably the boys. I don't remember that.
The big event here, of course, was Mardi Gras, and then we invited our own, and it was formal, and the young men came and brought corsages for us, and it was it was quite a lovely.
It was a busy time.
Our big thing revolved around Mardi Gras that month. Yeah.
Now, I've heard that there was a member of the faculty or the administration by the name of Miss Mumford.
She played a very important role.
Not only
socialized
in everything that we did.
everything.
She was very strict.
Well, she made certain that if we had a date, it was a proper date. And before we would be called to tell that our date had arrived, he would go through the paces in one of our little parlors. And if he was acceptable, he was able to spend the evening here and socialize. That wasn't an easy task.
I've heard a story that the Georgetown boys were different from the boys from West Point and Annapolis and Princeton and other schools that you may have invited to your ball. How was that? Well, how were they different?
Well, we would have little time between dances and so forth. And, you know, powder your nose and so forth. But the Georgetown boys would invite you to go out and see some of the statuary. And that was a no-no. Lots of girls got in trouble with that no-no. But if she really did go powder her nose, he would go out by himself and have a little
Cigarette? Or cigarette?
a little cheer. No, because on a Sunday morning, they would go around and behind the statuary there would be empty bottles. Georgetown was known for
Probably not only
their
Georgetown.
capabilities.
I'm sure it wasn't only Georgetown. Probably had a few other young men who were.
They were consistent.
Yeah, they were.
All right, thank you guys so much for coming.